I feel this is an existential moment, so what we do or don't do will change the face of the world for generations to come.
Russia has attacked Ukraine. Peace on our continent has been shattered. We now have war in Europe on a scale we thought belonged to history.
9/11 changed everything. And it proved that the existence of NATO needed to continue.
There is a responsibility to protect, and I think that showed, certainly in the Western Balkans, the importance of concerted international action.
When the wall came down, it was the most tangible proof of the division of Europe was going to finish. It was going to end.
It's really fantastic for everyone that these absolutely milestone changes occurred, and we can now say that Europe is a free part of the world.
I think it's important to look back at the past to understand how we've got to where we are today, to develop the most successful strategies moving forward.
If we stand united, Europe and North America, we can face every challenge as we have done over the past 75 years.
The other half of the walnut, as President Truman described it, was the security side, and the promise from the United States at that time that it would intervene in the event of a European war, so we wouldn't see a return to US isolationism as we had in the wake of World War I.
The treaty we are signing here today is evidence of the path they will follow. It is the will of the people of the world for freedom and for peace.
It was extraordinarily important, the creation of the alliance, and has been since then, because it's the only organization that offers hope that peace can become a real possibility, not just regionally, but more far-reaching than that.
There were Soviet troops across Central and Eastern Europe, so they didn't really have a choice in joining this alliance. It was nothing like NATO, which had been formed years before, with democracies choosing to join.
But I think what's key here with the Berlin Wall and what Churchill dubbed the Iron Curtain is actually how little contact there was for so many years between Eastern and Western Europe. And people growing up on both sides of the Iron Curtain had the threat of mutually assured destruction.
We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced.
People look at the Cold War and they assume that nothing happened, that it was static. But it wasn't static. It was a continuous discussion of security issues and the best ways that allies should address these security issues.
Communist Romania was the most repressive country in the Soviet bloc. We had very little to eat. We had no heating. We had no hot water. I grew up listening to foreign radio stations like the BBC, Deutsche Welle, literally under the bed covers, for fear that my neighbors would report me to the dreaded Securitate, the secret police. So for me and for my family, NATO was actually always a beacon of light, of hope.
I spent 2.5 years commanding a company on the inter-German border. In 1973, as a captain, I took my company to see the Berlin Wall, and we went into East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie. Those under Soviet control were very somber. When the wall came down, it was a huge, huge event. Peace had a chance. Peace really had a chance.
Those were dramatic and amazing moments, just to see the happiness that freedom can bring to people.
I was born in 1967. That was still the communist time in Hungary. So when I got to university, that was the time when, in fact, our first free elections took place. And all of a sudden, there was quite a huge change afterwards. And a change that we did not imagine when I was, for example, 6 years old. Certainly my parents were not even thinking that this could happen. So we are very proud that we managed to get into NATO and into the European Union.
I was a reporter in 1991 when the war broke out. So I started reporting from Yugoslavia when it was Yugoslavia. The NATO Secretary General in the 1990s, Manfred Wörner, was really committed to NATO doing what it could to intervene and to halt the conflict. And Manfred Wörner came literally from his deathbed to chair meetings of the North Atlantic Council in which he was arguing for a more robust NATO intervention, which eventually came in 1995.
NATO has been asked to act, and NATO will act. Our objective is to protect the safe areas against attacks so that the word safe really means what it says. Safe.
The NATO operation was the key to ending the Bosnian War in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
We must stop the violence and bring an end to the humanitarian catastrophe now taking place in Kosovo.
That was a very clear response to avoid ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. So there is a responsibility to protect, and I think that showed, certainly in the Western Balkans, the importance of concerted international action at an early stage.
NATO has provided for the past 25 years an important presence which contributes to the conditions for a peace process to take place, firstly in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but then subsequently also in Kosovo after a far greater NATO intervention in 1999.
We had the accession of the first three former communist countries, Poland, the Czech Republic and Hungary, joining in 1999. And then in 2004, 7 more countries joined in what was known as the Big Bang accession. And being there and watching the flags of Romania, but all the other countries that joined at the same time, was probably one of the most emotional moments in my life. These were countries that were part of the European, the Euro-Atlantic family that had been kept apart for so many decades, who are now coming home.
The countries who wished to join NATO after the Cold War were those countries who believed they had their sovereignty taken away from them, and they would look to NATO as a guarantor to protect them so that they would maintain that sovereignty in the future.
I was here in headquarters, and all of a sudden we were called to the office of the permanent representative because he was looking at the television and seeing the Twin Towers going down. It was a moment where we could not believe our eyes.
I came to the old NATO headquarters and I remember looking up and there was a plane. Because of course we're very close to Brussels airport. I thought, yeah, you know, this can also be a target, but it's also a source of strength.
NATO solidarity remains the essence of our alliance. Our message to the people of the United States is that we are with you. Our message to those who perpetrated these unspeakable crimes is equally clear. You will not get away with it.
There was a remarkable galvanization of support behind the United States. The Allies stood up and stood around the United States at that particular time, and that was very significant.
That was really a huge wake-up call that business as usual, obviously, wasn't going to continue.
If it is determined that this attack was directed from abroad against the United States, it shall be regarded as an action covered by Article 5 of the Washington Treaty.
I was elated, like other Americans, that the Alliance voted unanimously to apply Article 5. That was very meaningful to us.
There has been no other terrorist attack on our nations from Afghanistan. That security objective was achieved. The mission morphed into something closer to democracy building, and I think we were not able to achieve that goal. And I think we've also learned a lot from that mission.
NATO allies stand behind the legitimate aspirations of the Libyan people for freedom, democracy, and human rights.
Модель України. Хлопці є, американці.
I remember being at NATO headquarters practically all the time. There was very intense discussions. How do we know that those little green men in uniforms without insignia are actually Russian soldiers? But for the first time, we started using satellite imagery much more deliberately. We were exposing Russia's plans, Russia's intentions, and Russia's actions on the ground.
If the Russian leadership stays on its current course, together, we will ensure that this isolation deepens. Sanctions will expand, and the toll on Russia's economy, as well as its standing in the world, will only increase.
It was a clear signal that we could defend all allies against Russian aggression.
We are at the grave moment for the security of Europe. Russia is attempting to turn back the clock by force, to re-establish a sphere of influence, and to undermine the global rules that have kept Europe safe for decades.
When somebody from here asked me, will Russia attack Ukraine? My answer was no, that's not possible. I mean, they cannot be this short-sighted, for sure not. This is not going to happen. And I could not believe that in the 21st century there would be a war like that.
We knew what Russia intended to do. We could see them amassing their troops, so it was clear that an invasion was imminent. NATO was prepared to defend all allies, to send a very clear message that we would defend every ally and that we would continue to support Ukraine.
Allies which were once part of the Soviet Union and the allies which were once Warsaw Pact countries are understandably terrified at the prospect of a resurgent Russia. And this was obviously the reason that they were so eager to join NATO, for protection against the kind of existential threat that Ukraine is now facing.
To see the flag of Finland and Sweden raised outside NATO headquarters was an amazing moment. It showed that countries have the right to choose, that NATO's door remains open, and that Putin has achieved a strategic failure, because if he wanted to have less NATO, he has more NATO. For me, joining NATO was not a career step, it was a mission. And even if I'm retired now from NATO, it remains a cornerstone of who I am.
Once you become a member of this alliance, you immediately feel the gravitas of that. And you know, that's what NATO is about. So if one ally is threatened, then everybody is making sure we are helping that ally, and one for all for one.
Above all, it is a forum for debating security issues and building consensus among allies.
This alliance is strong. This alliance consists of countries that have worked together for decades. That's what NATO is, more than anything.